Welcome to the Mind of Business Success podcast. I'm your host, Alicia Kramer. Our guest today is Kaitlyn Rose. Let's get into your expansion as an entrepreneur. I want to welcome you to the show, Kaitlyn.
Thank you. I'm really excited and happy to be here with you.
I'm excited to have a conversation that is very unique from what we normally talk about and so incredibly powerful. Before we get into the topic of expansion and what that actually means, because for some entrepreneurs who are listening, they may be thinking expansion in terms of, oh, growing my business, scaling, that type of expansion. That is obviously a piece of what I'm talking about, but what I'm really talking about here is our own internal evolution and expansion, because we cannot create what we are not. And so we have to become what we want to create. Getting very esoteric here. Let's start by talking a little bit about your business and what you do so our listeners have a frame of reference for your area of expertise.
Absolutely. So, my business is called Her Temple, and we offer women's work. So, working with women, especially somatically. And you might or might not be familiar with the term somatics. It's a term that means kind of a broad term, actually, that can mean many different things. But at its essence, it means in connection with the body, listening to the body, centering the body as a guide. And in Her Temple, we support women in reconnecting with their bodies, the wisdom of the body, and releasing any blockages or traumas that have been stuck as imprints inside that are no longer serving the direction that you're wanting to go to. These trauma imprints that are really designed for survival or keeping us safe, and that had a really beautiful purpose at one point in our life, but eventually need to be reconciled, moved through, and released in order for us to reach a greater expansion into who we truly are and to what we truly want. And so that's what Her Temple does. We have one-on-one work, we do retreats, we have some online programming, a really deep immersive training women in the modality, which is called somatic yoga therapy. It's the modality that we use. And yeah, at the core, it's really about reconnecting women to the power and the wisdom of the physical body.
As we're going sort of down this rabbit hole, for our listeners who may be a bit newer to some of these concepts and newer to this type of work, I'd love to shed a little bit of light on how truly transformational this type of deeper work can be. We have historically rewarded external success, external accomplishments. My business generated, $1 million in revenue. My business generated $10 million in revenue. My business generated $100 million, right? It's always about this external validation. And while there's nothing wrong with externals, a lot of people get lost on the journey because there are these imprints from early on in life, we'll say, that block us, stop us, keep us from the growth and the expansion, or have us chasing these superficial goals that never lead to true fulfillment. I want to talk about where a lot of this imprinting comes from and how it shows up in people's lives and how they may be experiencing it as blocks or setbacks or stagnation in their business. Can you talk on that from your perspective?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are a few main sources of where these imprints arise from. You can call them trauma imprints or blockages or stuck energy, stuck patterns in the body and the nervous system. And one could be a literal shock trauma experience. So things like a medical event or a car accident or the things that we kind of maybe typically go toward when we think about a trauma, something that's very overt and shocking to the system. But there's also, as you mentioned, those early life imprints, which you can call developmental pieces or attachment wounds, which again, might be hard to identify or to see when this is really happening. It's a lot more subtle than a shock trauma, right? Like if a car accident happens, I can see that there's a literal maybe wound and it's a little more overt. And in this developmental space, there's a lot more subtlety. It can be a little harder to see or to name or to feel. And oftentimes there's also a pre-verbal component to it because these experiences happen before we even develop language in our repertoire. And so this developmental piece oftentimes has to do with our upbringing, with parents or caregivers. And most of our caregivers are well intended, and still there can be a lot of imprints and wounds and pieces that come from there, really just from collective misunderstanding on how to like raise or be with a little one from a nervous system informed place. And so that can leave some really big imprints and really big damage on the individual and also on our collective. And then beyond that, I also work in the more like esoteric, can call it spiritual realm with sometimes there are past life experiences that come through, ancestral experiences, which can feel very like esoteric, but there is a lot of science-backed research on how we literally do pass down our traumas genetically from parents or grandparents to child or grandchild. And then just in terms of the energy body, no matter what type of trauma it is, and there are many different types of trauma, and that word may or may not resonate. You can also think of blockage or stuck pattern or wound, whatever language works for you. I don't think we have to get stuck on that, but there's always going to be an energetic and soul component connected with that from what I've seen. That if there is a physical or an emotional trauma, there's going to be some sort of disconnect from soul that happens. And in shamanic language, which I'm not a shaman, but I love studying shamanism and it's a big influence in my work, they call it soul flight. When something really painful happens, when something really traumatic happens, which again could be very overt or it could be very, very subtle and relational and emotional, fragments of our soul depart from our body, and then we lose these qualities of who we truly are inside. And so part of this work that we're doing is through the body connecting with these areas that hold these wounds inside, getting curious on what these wounds need quite physically in order to feel complete. Like they don't have to keep reliving again and again and again. And once that is healed, once that is moved through, now there's more space for those soul fragments to come back home. Again, in shamanism, they call it soul retrieval, like bringing those parts of ourselves that have been pushed to the sidelines or exiled or just feel like they like disappeared or vanished. And maybe this happened so young that like in your conscious memory, you never even remember connecting to this vital part of yourself. Those get to come back home, and all of a sudden there's more life and aliveness. And as you said, expansion that naturally gets to happen without force.
I've personally seen that everyone has these types of challenges to varying degrees. It's sort of part of the human experience. As you mentioned, even the most well-meaning parents can sometimes accidentally, inadvertently create some negative conditioning. And many of us did not have particularly high vibrational, happy, positive, loving, empowering parents. So there is a lot of this trauma. There are a lot of these blocks, a lot of these things that it doesn't matter again, like you said, it doesn't matter. You can look at it from a metaphysical perspective. You can look at it from a more modern psychological perspective. It doesn't matter how you want to interpret it. It all kind of comes home to the same key themes. It's the same stuff. Um, we have to work through these things, and it's interesting because I've found, and perhaps you see this as well, but certainly specializing in working with entrepreneurs as I do as a hypnotherapist and doing energy work myself, the field that a lot of people go into, there is oftentimes an interesting parallel for them between the sort of healing work that they need to do and the type of service or product that they are compelled or called to do in this world. It's a very interesting dynamic. And I'm curious, for those who are listening who may be on a journey of self-discovery. They may be on a journey of healing, and perhaps they're feeling blocked or stuck, and they're just like, I just don't get it. I tried everything. I've done all the stuff. I should be further along than I am by now. This issue should be resolved. My business should be further. I should be more clear, whatever it is. Where would you guide someone to start? Or what might you guide them to look at, or some tips or something to maybe get people pointed in the right direction?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, with business owners and entrepreneurs, it's actually really beautiful because for many, there's this real like high achiever, driven, motivated, energized part of the personality that's really good at managing. And by that I mean it's really good at keeping one going in a certain direction. And sometimes what that takes is also a bit of repression that happens at the same time. Like, and again, this is all like we can think of it from a nervous system perspective as part of survival wiring. It's like, thank God that these patternings are here, right? It's part of what has allowed you to create the business that you've created and to create the life that you've created without some of the like pain bodies keeping you stuck and getting in your way. And at the same time, even with that, oftentimes there's this lingering sense or feeling of like, I'm doing all of this, or maybe I have a lot of success, but something still just doesn't feel quite right, or I'm not able to actually allow myself to receive and to enjoy this, or I still have this like scarcity fear that it's all going to disappear and like just one morning I'll wake up and it will all be gone, or these really deep patterns that happen. And I see in a lot of entrepreneurial people really who are really successful, they're simultaneously oftentimes really, really good at uh, pretending like nothing is wrong, even when something feels really hard and heavy inside. And again, part of that's a way that we cope and we move through life. It's not inherently a negative or a bad thing. And eventually there will come a time where we want to bring all of you to the table instead of just this one part. And what that can look like and where we start is with the body. Think about these like managing really successful parts. Oftentimes they have a very mental energy. Some of the languaging you even just said of like, I shouldn't be feeling this way, or I've done all the work and I'm still like, it doesn't feel quite right, or all of these thoughts that come into the mind. Um, that's all a sign to me that there's something in the body underneath that has yet to actually be touched into and felt, because we can do as much journaling as we want. We can do as much talk therapy as we want. We can, vent as much as we want to our friends. And in the body, it's still not going to clear the imprint of these experiences. We have to go in and we have to feel them. And we have to do so in a way where we don't feel lost by the immensity of what we're feeling, where we're not shaming ourselves or telling ourselves this isn't valid, this isn't real, I shouldn't be feeling this way. We have to do this in a really clean and heart connected way, which is not always easy, especially with these very deep, again, early life trauma patterns. Is usually there's a lot of shame connected with them, a lot of you're to this, you're to that, you shouldn't feel this way, you should feel that way. All of these beliefs that we have, usually those are connected to those first 7 years of our life and what we received from our caregivers. For example, don't cry when you're sad, right? It's the message that many of us have received from somebody in our life at one point in time. As we get emotional, we get sad, and we hear, don't cry. And it's coming from a well-intentioned place, but the imprint of that is, it's not okay for me to feel this. That doesn't make the feeling go away just by not crying and sitting up straighter and starting to like really focus in school or creating a business and avoiding the feelings. It's not going to actually make the imprint of that go away. It's just going to create some like coping patterns and almost like an addictive tendency that can happen too, where now I'm addicted to success or I'm addicted to my work, and if anything happens that threatens that, I spiral into some really deep shame, and I spiral into some really deep depression and sadness because so much of my identity is woven in with my success. And so, again, we start to detangle some of this, not by talking about it, not by affirmations, not by journaling, which I love all of those things. They're beautiful, they're great, they're important. But by actually going into the body, into the sensations that we feel, and giving some breathing room for the heaviness or the pain or the rage inside to have an outlet that was never accessible in the past. And there are kind of two different ways that we work with this once we connect to a space that needs a little clearing. Is we think about what didn't get to happen that needed to. So, like, for example, there might be like a fight flight pattern that actually didn't get to happen, that was shut down, that really needed to. You might have needed to like stand up for yourself and say no in a certain moment, or hide or run away. And that wasn't able to fully come into completion. And so then that stress imprint gets stuck in the body. But more of like what we're talking about with the developmental pieces is, what did you need that you didn't receive? And oftentimes that's one of three things: it's protection, nurturing, and love, or guidance and wisdom. And so when we're working with these, especially developmental imprints in the body, I believe we're actually going back in time, and we're actually going back to these very young little parts of ourselves, and we're offering them what they never received in that moment, which might be that little girl or little boy tearing up. And in that moment, they're told, don't cry, or we don't have time for this right now. We freeze that moment and we get curious. What did you actually need in that moment? And it was like, I just needed my mom to hold me and to tell me it was okay. And there's so much healing that actually happens from that. We don't even actually have to necessarily like make real changes in the past. We can just use the power of our imagination and connect with our body and allow ourselves to receive these experiences. And all of a sudden, that circuit that gets stuck now has some liberation to find a new way of expressing itself. And there's more love and acceptance for oneself. And there's not as much of the like addictive work patterning that we can get really stuck into. And now it's coming from a place of play and inspiration and fun, instead of like, I've got to do this or something bad's really going to happen.
Right. I absolutely love the way that you laid that out. And to your point, I like to call that trying to out action your misalignment, or, we try to out action our fear. There is that tendency to try to fix with these, I'll just say more affirmations, or I'll just work harder. And at some point, you've got to just admit to yourself, okay, this just is not working. It is not working. And, the journey that you took us through, there's so much wisdom. I'm really going to highly encourage our listeners to listen again, because the wisdom that you shared and the practical guidance, the healing that is possible when we go through this process is so profound. I find that when I'm working with clients, I do have a tendency to attract a lot of that stereotypical business minded type of individual. And I'm a recovering workaholic, highly driven overachiever myself, who has been on this healing journey for a very, very long time. And so teaching teaching this process of feeling and releasing emotions and not always defaulting to the old mind heavy approach to solving everything. Sometimes we need someone to hold space for us to do that, because our default is not to be present with those emotions. It is not to go into that place where we can actually heal those hurt, wounded, fragmented parts of ourself. The type of work that you do is so incredibly valuable. I'm noticing that it is becoming a little bit more accepted by even some of our more driven uh, Western culture, um, science minded, if you will, as opposed to being more spiritual type of individuals. But there still is a lot of taboo around it. I would love to just take a moment and speak to your own journey as a business owner and how perhaps you had to work through some of your own mindset challenges and how this approach has helped you to do that.
Hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting because I kind of come from the opposite side of the spectrum where um, I I got started in this work because I needed it myself, and part of healing myself has been taking these trainings and doing these experiences and um, knitting together all of these missing pieces because I have a extensive trauma history and background from my early childhood into adulthood and just memories that I repressed that I didn't even know were a part of my story, but I could feel in my body. And so the journey began for me as a really personal piece of, trying to discover and uncover what was happening inside. And as I healed, the clearer and clearer it became that I'm meant to be of service for others and to bring this work to those who are called to it. And from there, it's like, okay, now I got to figure out all of this like business and entrepreneurial stuff because if I really am meant to and want to bring this out into the world, there are some pieces that I really need to bring into place in order for that to make sense for me. And it's definitely been a journey because I come from definitely a very spiritual background and feel very soul led and soul guided. And there's been a lot of like reconciliation between what I think business is and what I think money is to what it actually is. And um, getting into congruence with business and with spirit has been a huge journey for me. And I'm still on it. I'm still exploring like absolutely what fits and what feels right. And to answer like the second level of your question, which is how has this work supported me in that, is just as I kind of gave the example to earlier, is really connecting to my body first and foremost. I've learned not to trust my thoughts. At least not all of them. Like sure, some thoughts are trustworthy, but most thoughts are just repetitions from past experiences that we say over and over and over again. And most thoughts, all thoughts, have a somatic imprint. We think one thing, it's going to be connected to a body space, a body feeling, an emotion inside, whether we're aware of that or not. And so I've really learned to kind of go beyond the mind, at least at first, to connect with whatever's happening in my body And the way that we do that is through connecting to the felt sense, so sensations. And I know for a lot of more analytical or mind-based people, it can be actually hard to even know like what does she mean by sensation? And it's quite simple. It's like when you're hungry, you feel a gnawing in your belly. When you're hot, you feel heat and like sweat, right? But the same thing's happening beyond the physiological responses into our emotions, like butterflies in your belly when you're nervous, or a heaviness in your heart when you're sad, heat in your face when you're angry. Um, and it goes even more subtle beyond that, in that we have these sensations that are happening within us all of the time that we've been taught to numb ourselves from, to cut off from, and to invalidate. And the only thing that we validate is the mind and logic and thoughts, which again is on a healing level. It's not a very like consistent source to rely on, because many of our thoughts are kind of just regurgitated information from past experiences that like on a wash cycle over and over and over again. And so connecting to sensations in the body, I find it's how we start to translate some of our inner experiences, which might actually be, for those listening, somatic symptoms that have just felt like, I don't even understand where this is coming from. The digestive issues, the skin outbreaks, the fatigue, the pain in the body, the gnawing feeling in the chest or the belly that just won't go away, and it's like not sure where it's coming from. Oftentimes there is a very physical component to what we're working with, but we connect with the sensations and get curious what's in there. And that quality of curiosity is really, really important. We can't do this work coming from a place of trying to fix ourselves or change ourselves. It's just going to make things get more and more stuck inside. So we have to really come from a surrendered, curious, compassionate place of just show me what's here. And as you said, oftentimes we need a guide to support us in that, because there's a lot of deep resistant patternings that emerge, especially around uncomfortable experiences where we have been habitually trained to avoid. And so oftentimes we do need some support and guidance, and actually being able to touch in on where some of these deeper experiences reside within. But for me in my journey, as I connected more and more to my body, which started through yoga and then deepened into somatics and the body of work that I'm offering now, somatic yoga therapy, this beautiful blend of the two, has really taught me how to validate and be with all of my experiences, and how to discharge stuck, pent up stress and energy in a way where that's no longer controlling my life. Well, that energy is not controlling me, and my avoidance of it isn't controlling me. So now I have a lot more options. I have a lot more options and a lot more clarity for what I really want, which for me is like, I don't want to live a life that's always trying to avoid feeling a certain way, or that's built upon a certain past pain imprint. I want a life that's clear and clean and liberated and expanded. And in order for me to have that, in order for us to have that, we have to do some deep clearing and excavation work of these patterns that really deeply bind us to our past traumas. And in that way, it really becomes like a cage or shackles that keep us actually held back from the direction that we really want to go in.
This has been a very educational episode. I want to remind our listeners to re-listen. So much wisdom, so much value. And I also want to encourage them to reach out to you if they feel like this would help them. So can you share with our listeners how they can connect with you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would be so happy to support you in reaching your business goals, especially if like something has been um, resonating for you and listening to this, you're like, oh yeah, there's something here. So yeah, please reach out. A couple of ways to do that. You can go to our website, which is hertemplehealing.com. We have a page on there about one-on-one sessions. So you can go to that page and learn a little bit more about what that looks like. You can also connect with us on Instagram at her.temple.healing. And then finally, we have an online course that could be a really great place to start. It's a 6-week somatic healing container. There's a lot of educational components as well as daily practices based in somatic movements and meditations, sensory based meditations that help to rewire your nervous system, which is also really wonderful for balancing hormones, for relieving pain and stress from the body, for like just getting clearer inside. So those are some of the resources I would recommend. And yeah, I'm totally happy to connect with anyone who reaches out. So please don't hesitate to send me a message or an email. I would love to chat.
I want to thank you so much for being with us today, Kaitlyn, and sharing your journey and sharing your wisdom. It has been very informative, and I know that this can really help a lot of people.
Thank you. It's been so nice to connect with you and to chat. And this work is so important to me and powerful. So I hope that it's inspired some of your listeners.
Well, I hope that it's inspired some of our listeners as well. And of course, we're thanking you for tuning in. If you haven't already subscribed, make sure you do so. And until next time, we will see you in the next episode.